Hello, I am Debbie McKeever, founder and owner of Strong and Healthy Temple, and welcome to my series on the wilderness experience. If you watch the prelude to this video, then you know I'm going to kick it off by talking about the wilderness experience of the children of Israel. What you probably don't know is that I have attempted to record this video over 20 times, and that's because I was competing with the noise in the background. The tree people were in the neighborhood yesterday, and I recorded what I thought was the final video, but after I went back and listened to it, it was very noisy and distracting, and it actually took away from the message. So in my final attempt to record this, I'm hoping that it does not take away from my original point. And I did want to reiterate that in these Bible illustrations, that I'm not looking at these as literal events that happened in history as much as I'm looking at them allegorically and comparing them to our own mind and mental states. So with that being said, I want to jump right into it. The first thing that I think about when I think about the children of Israel's experience is that God originally was going to send them through a more direct route to the promised land by way of the Philistines, and it was going to be an 11-day journey, but he changed his mind and instead sent them through the wilderness of sin by way of the Red Sea. And the reason that he did that is because there was a lot of warring going on in the land of the Philistines, and he didn't want them to become discouraged or have to fight their way through and then become weary and turn back to the bondage of Egypt. And what Egypt represents is our own mental slavery, the bondage in our own minds, the fears, the doubt, the discouragement, the lack of clarity, the negativity. That's our own mental enslavement. And so when we're going through the wilderness experience is designed to develop our faith and build us up in faith and build up our character and strengthen our mental and spiritual muscles. And so instead of going the fast path and possibly giving up, a lot of times we'll go through the wilderness experience so that we'll be built up and prepared to receive that thing that we've been praying for, or whatever it is that God has promised us. And I know a lot of times we want everything like right now. We want the fast path. We want the 11-day journey instead of the 40-day journey. But a lot of times we're not prepared to receive the things that we've prayed for. For example, these people that win the lotteries, you have these people, they've never had money before and they don't have any financial literacy, and they go from broke to all of a sudden a millionaire, and then in 1 to 5 years they're back to square one. They're broke again because they had no idea about saving or investing or how to properly spend money, and so they ended up squandering the money. And that's in anything that you're not prepared for. It could be a relationship that you're not prepared for, and you end up in a rotten relationship or a sour marriage that ends prematurely in divorce. And so God wanted to take them through the route that would build them up. And it was supposed to be a 40-day journey, but it ended up being 40 years because they were grumbling and complaining and, basically lacking faith. And a lot of times that's what holds us up in our journey. And I'll just use time as an example because there's no time in God. It could be that God wanted you to have it in 10 days, but because of your own lack of faith and you're grumbling and complaining and you're doubting, it took you 100 days to get it instead because you prolonged your journey through a lack of faith. And that's the purpose of the wilderness experience, is to build you up. And I think about when they got to the Red Sea, the first thing that they did was all of a sudden they were they lacked faith in God. When they saw it, they looked back and saw the Egyptians on their heels, and they immediately started to complain that God brought us out here to drown. We may as well have just stayed back in Egypt. If we were back there, we were going to die, and now we're going to die now because we won't be able to get across, the sea. And so a lot of times that's how we feel. It's like lip service versus true faith. once you get to what you perceive to be an obstacle, you go from all of a sudden confessing with your mouth that nothing is impossible with God to backing up off of your faith. Now all of a sudden you don't see how God is going to be able to cut you a clear path, through the sea that you're facing, or remove this mountain that you're facing. And so they started grumbling and complaining and getting into fear, and God immediately commanded them through Moses to stand still and see his salvation. And so that's what it is with us. Like when we come up against what we perceive as barriers or obstacles, a lot of times what we need to do is just to be still, so that we can hear from God, so we can hear from God who's within, not far away in the sky. God is within each one of us. And so we have to sit still and be quiet long enough to hear the next set of instructions, so that we'll know how to move. And once they were still and got out of fear and back into faith, then God was able to cut them a clear path, and they were able to walk through on dry land. And of course, the Egyptians were then drowned in the Red Sea. So basically that's all your fears and doubts and all that stuff being drowned. And now you're in faith, so you're on your way, to the land of the milk and honey. And the next thing that I think about, once they got there, they started, when they were in the wilderness, they started complaining that they were hungry, So I guess they had run out of the food that they had brought with them. And so God rained down the manna from heaven, and he gave them clear instructions on the manna to only collect a certain amount each day, and that there would be a manna available for each day. Well, some of the people doubted. They didn't believe, and so they started collecting extra manna, so that, just in case God didn't come through. And that's how it is with us. We'll say that we're believing God for a certain thing, but just in case he doesn't come through this time, even though God has come through for you a million times in the past, just in case he doesn't come through this time, you got to have that plan B. You got to get just a little bit extra of the manna. And so what happened when they collected too much of it is that they couldn't even eat it, because the next day it was rotten and it had worms and all that stuff in it. And they were able to see, once they went outside, that new manna was falling for the next day. And so that's how it is, that God will, give you provision on a daily basis. When you believe for that, God will always divinely provide. Like, there's no need for you to, start manipulating all these other plans just in case God doesn't come through this time, because God is always the same. God doesn't change. And so the next thing I think about is when they became ungrateful. And that's what we do. We're tired of this bread. We want some meat. This bread's getting old. And that's how we do. We start to become ungrateful for the things that God is blessing us with, and we want more before we even get what we've already prayed for, or we forget to stop and be grateful for what we already have. There's nothing wrong with wanting more. Be grateful, but don't be afraid to want more and to ask for more, because God is a big God, and so you can always want more, but make sure that you're grateful for what you already have. But they weren't grateful for the manna. They were complaining about the manna, so now they wanted meat, and God ended up having to rain down quail to satisfy him. But anyway, they started complaining about how when they were in Egypt, they had the leeks and the onions and all that kinds of stuff. And that's what we do. We start looking back to what we used to have. The leeks and the onions represent the things that we used to have, like in a relationship, because the relationship that you're in is more challenging than what you expected, because what God is doing is he's using this relationship to mature you. But you don't want that. You want that comfort zone. You want to be back in that comfortable relationship. That's the leeks and the onions. You want to stay stagnant. You don't want to grow. And so, I wish I was in that, back in that relationship with John or Paul or Mary, because they, John, Paul, and Mary, they understood me. It's not that the current person doesn't understand you. It's just the fact that God is using that person to stretch you and to grow you. Same thing with a job. If you're an entrepreneur and you've stepped out in faith on your own, and then it's harder than what you expected. So then all of a sudden, you wish you were back in that job again, because at that point the leeks and the onions represent what you felt like were the security of a job and the security of that salary. And God, being all knowing, he knew that a couple years down the road that job was going to outsource and lay you off all of a sudden. I've had that happen where I was obedient to leave, two of the companies that I left, and after I left, there was outsourcing. At the first company, people got laid off, and then the second company got acquired by another company, and those people, that were there lost their jobs. So, it's just important to, receive the instructions of God, and, not be trying to plan things in your own mind. When you pray for something, just trust that and you're trusting God, just trust that God knows what God is doing. You may not know, but God knows. And so the next thing that I think about is when Moses went up on Mount Sinai, and in the people's mind, he was taking too long. And so the first thing they did was they built a golden calf. And that's what we do when we pray for something. It's taking God too long. It's already been 24 hours and you ain't got it yet. So, and that might be an exaggeration, but sometimes we do think like that. It's already been a week or a month or whatever, and God ain't moving fast enough. So then that's when we build the golden calf. And the golden calf is, we're building that, in our minds. The golden calf is all the things that you look to and look for externally. You start looking outside of yourself, and you forget your oneness with God, and you forget that God is within you. And so instead of going within, where all the answers really lie, and waiting for and getting still and waiting for that still small voice, you start looking to all these external sources and trying to do it in your own power, or you trying to help God out. You know what you prayed for, so you just want God to bless your will. You start doing it yourself. That's your golden calf. The next thing that I think about is when Moses sent out the 12 spies, and 10 of them came back with a negative report, and 2 of them came back with a positive report. Well, those 2 represent your underdeveloped faith. You have some faith, but it hasn't been fully developed. So, like 20% of your mind is in faith, and the other 80% is out of faith. All the fear and doubt and negativity and all that uncertainty and all that stuff, and how is God going to do it, and I don't know if that can be done. That's the 10 spies. That's what that represents. And so the 10 spies, the 2 spies came back and said, we're well able to conquer the land. And, they gave a good report of the land flowing with milk and honey. And that was Caleb and Joshua. And Caleb and Joshua, they were in faith and they were ready and they knew they could overtake it. But the other 10 spies were negative and doubtful, and we're not able to overtake it, and there are giants in the land, and we're just grasshoppers, in their sight. And a lot of times that's how we see ourselves. We shrink back and we see ourselves as small, and we see our situations as impossible, and we forget how big our God is, and we forget that we have the power within to move mountains. And so we start seeing ourselves as small, or we start like they were comparing themselves to the giants and seeing themselves as grasshoppers. We start comparing ourselves to other people and their journey, not knowing what their wilderness experience was. I could never be like so-and-so. You don't know what so-and-so had to go through to get to where so-and-so is at. And I look at some of the celebrities like Steve Harvey and Oprah and Tyler Perry and Michael Jordan. I mean, some of these people went through things where they had to live in their cars, and went through sexual abuse, got fired from jobs, got cut from teams, and all these different things to get from where they're at now. And a lot of times you didn't even hear their stories initially. You just saw all the fame and the glory, and then later on when they gave their testimony, you realize where they came from. Well, God is no respecter of persons. The same way that God did it for Steve and Oprah and Michael and Tyler, God will do that same thing for you. You just have to go through your wilderness season. And so now I want to fast forward to after Moses had already died and Joshua had taken over as leader as the children of Israel. And they were about to enter the city of Jericho, and Jericho had up these, strong walls to discourage people from going in and out of the city. And so Joshua needed to send in spies, and he sent in 2 spies to spy out the city, trying to figure out how they could get in and, conquer once they got in. And something unexpected happened. A harlot by the name of Rahab ended up hiding the spies on Joshua's behalf. And a lot of times that's what happens in our life, is that some unexpected event or some unexpected person will come in and get us to where we need to be. A lot of times we get discouraged because we feel like we're not getting the support of people that we feel like should be supporting us, family and friends, or we feel like things are not happening the way that we expect them to happen. That's why it's not good to get attached to an outcome. Just believe God for it and don't worry about how it's going to happen. Just know that it is going to happen, and in fact it's already happened, and it's just waiting to come to fruition. And so this unexpected person, Rahab, represents the unexpected person that God can use to come into your life. It could be a total stranger that propels you to where you need to go. Just trust God. And then speaking of Joshua, once they had spied out Jericho and everything, now they were trying to figure out how they were going to get past these walls. And so God had given Joshua divine instructions for them to walk around the city, walk around the walls for 7 days. On the first 6 days, they were to walk around for 1 time. And on the 7th day, they were to walk around it 7 times, and then the priest would blow the horns, and God promised them that the walls would collapse. Well, these sounded like illogical instructions. It sounded foolish, like it wouldn't work. And so that's how it is a lot of times in our lives. When we receive divine instructions, it's either something that sounds, foolish or stupid, or, we're too embarrassed to follow the instructions because we're worried about how it's going to look or what other people are going to think of us. And so then we don't do, what God has told us to do because we don't want to look silly, or what if it doesn't work and all this kinds of thing, instead of just being obedient. Because what God is trying to do is he's trying to propel us to the next level by using our faith, which he's been developing in this wilderness experience. And so a lot of times he's just trying to get us out of our comfort zone. And our comfort zone, that's going to look different for everybody. What one person is comfortable doing may not be something that another person is comfortable doing. And so, you just receive your instructions and do what you've been instructed to do, and not worry about the next person. Because if you're just trying to do what other people have been doing, then basically all you're doing is copycatting. And so just because you believing for a house and you go and walk around a house for 7 days and blow a horn doesn't mean that you're going to get that house, because you're not following whatever instructions God gave you. And so they did follow God's instructions and, walked around the city. And on the 7th day, they walked around 7 times and blew the horns. And lo and behold, the walls of Jericho collapsed and they were able to go in. It's the same thing with us. Do whatever you've been instructed to do, and the walls of Jericho, so to speak, will collapse on your behalf. And then in hindsight, you'll see that all these things that you perceive to be giants and barriers and obstacles were really just grasshoppers. It was all in your mind. The limits were in your mind. There were really no limits whatsoever. And so that's what we have to do. We have to get our faith built up, while we're in this wilderness experience, and just learn how to trust God blindly. Develop a blind faith. It's like closing your eyes and, walking and believing that you're going to get to where you're supposed to go, or walking in the dark, believing that you are going to get to the place where the light is. So anyway, that is a wrap for part 1. I know this is a little bit longer than what my videos normally are, so I thank you for sticking with me. Please subscribe to the videos. Hit the bell icon to receive notifications of when I release other videos in the series and when I release other videos and other subjects. Hit the like button if you like this video. Thank you again so much for sticking with me and for watching. Make it a fantastic day and week.